Morning. My name is Demetra. I think I've been introduced already by Atali and Angie. So I'm a genetic counsellor working at Northwest Thames Regional Genetic Service and the Family Cancer Clinic at St Mark's. Today I'm going to try to keep it quite casual, and I would like for you to be involved, so I hope you're very much awake and not shy. I'm going to talk to you about how to communicate information about Lynch syndrome. Obviously, Atali and Angie talked about what it is, and this is the information that you usually get when you see us in clinic. And it's quite important that you pass that on to relatives when you go home or when you talk about your decisions, so that they will also be informed about what's happening with you and what their risks are. So today we'll discuss about why it's important to disseminate this information, how to do it, when is best to be done, how to identify who needs to know, and how to seek for some extra help and support. So unlike any other condition, for example, breaking a bone or having short-sightedness, having a genetic condition means that not just one member of the family is affected, there may be more. So this is a prime reason why we think it's useful for relatives to be informed about a genetic finding, so that they will use that information to benefit themselves and to reduce their risks. It also may actually encourage an open communication in the family. For example, if you're going through a difficult time, feeling a bit anxious or worried about the condition, your relative will understand where you're coming from and may be able to support you. So, I'm going to use this metaphor to try and explain why it's important to talk. Ever come across a situation? Hands up. Yeah? Okay, so do you think that you would ever reach a destination in time in this situation? Yes or no? No. Pessimists. Okay. Actually, it's true. I would too feel the same. And in life, we sometimes come across difficulties, delays, unexpected trouble. And in a way, when we face a new diagnosis, like for example Lynch syndrome, it may be similar. We may feel that we're quite stuck, or we may come across a situation that we didn't foresee. And sometimes the only way, or maybe one of the ways we can help ourselves deal with this situation is to be prepared. So if, for example, we did our homework and knew that it was traffic, we can choose another route, or maybe use a train. Which one of you thinks that this way would be helpful in getting somewhere on time? Hands up? Good. In the same way, if we inform our families about a genetic condition, they may be aware of what's coming. They may be in position to make decisions about risk-reducing surgery, about screening, and actually just be prepared about what the risk is and might find it easier to cope with this. They wouldn't be shocked as such by their risks or by any problems that may come across. Saying that, it's actually hard to talk about genetics. It's very complicated. Sometimes I find myself being troubled by what everything means, and I understand that it can be very complex to talk about your children or your relatives about a very complex scientific fact. And it can also be very, very complex emotionally. So how to do it? I think it's very, very important to just be yourself, try to relax and get to know your facts before you communicate them with the family, and take some time. If, for example, there's a period of time where you're feeling quite anxious about this, or if you're still shocked by the diagnosis, you don't have to rush into it. You can take your time, talk to someone, be your partner or your genetic counsellor, or seek some support from your GP if you feel very, very anxious, and help yourself deal with it first. Then it's important to be aware that your relatives may not feel the same way about this as you are. For example, they may be a bit more anxious than you or less anxious than you, or may just want to withdraw for a bit and then come back to you with questions. So don't expect anything from when you break the news. It may actually be the easiest thing that you've done, or it may be the most difficult. It might be something that they didn't see coming, but just be prepared that it will actually become slightly better with time, because everyone takes their own time to deal with a crisis, as most people do. And obviously it's very, very, very important to choose a good place and time. Tesco is not great. You can choose a time when you are doing an activity with someone, or maybe you are at home and you have some time ahead. And try to use information that is positive. For example, I had a patient whose mother unfortunately passed away suffering from gynecological cancer. And she was herself very, very, very worried about her risk of gynecological cancer. And she projected that anxiety to her children, and she told me, well, I can't tell them because they'd be so anxious about this. I'm so worried about this myself. And she, interestingly, was due to have a risk of using surgery. So that risk that she was worried about was, in a way, going to be greatly reduced. And I tried to help her realize that actually what she's worried about is going away, and maybe she can portray that to her children that yes, there is this risk, but actually I'm doing well, I'm controlling this. People deal with things better and problems much easier if they know that there's options and they have control over their problems. This is the greatest question about family communication. I think most people find it hard to talk to their children. Who of you has children? Okay. Studies have shown that when children are aware of their family history from a young age, they deal with it much better when they grow up. They understand the risks and they're much more likely to make decisions about screening and management, and they just cope with it slightly better than children who do not know. It also helps them be involved in family decisions. They understand why mum and dad may need to have a colonoscopy. They understand what's happening. And it can actually help them empower their trust in you as parents. Also, secrecy may increase anxiety in children. I think you all probably are aware that no matter how much you try to hide something from your child, they will have a clue of like, there's something wrong, I can pick something. And interestingly, most parents feel relieved after they tell their children. And obviously, it's hard to imagine telling a 4-year-old about MSH2. I don't think they will understand much of it. But just be aware that it's helpful for any child at any age to just be told some information based on their level of understanding. I'm just going to go through several stages and how to breach this with children. So 8-year-olds until 11, they have a basic understanding of genetics. I don't think they understand much about MMR genes or MSH2, but they probably understand that they look like mum and dad and they may have inherited something from the family. So try to provide very basic explanations. So you can say, for example, so we've got this in the family. We don't have to say exactly what gene it is, but you can say that, oh, we've got a family history of cancer. And try to be as truthful as you can to their questions, because that age is very curious. They just bombard with questions. Also, it's very, very crucial to explain that having Lynch syndrome is not the same as having cancer. I think many children are very worried about this possibility. And also, it might be a good thing to just breach the subject by being open about your appointments. For example, children can understand that mum and dad is going to have a colonoscopy because they want to make sure that tummy is well, etc. Preteen children have a better understanding about inheritance because of school, and I think science curriculum includes some basic explanations of this. They understand the implications to them, and most interestingly, they know the internet, and they probably know it better than you. So it's very, very crucial for parents and maybe for us to direct them to the most appropriate resource, because the worst thing is for them to be misinformed about this and maybe land into a web page that has worst case scenarios and be very, very worried. And most children at this age, as you probably know, do not like the sit-down talk. So Mike, we have to have a chat, would not really work with them. So try to be very casual, maybe talk to them as you're having a walk, or maybe as you're baking a cake, or something that they enjoy and they do with you in their private time. Teenagers hopefully understand inheritance because they are taught genetics at school. They may also have heard about Lynch syndrome. I think BRCA and some other inherited susceptibilities are taught in school. They definitely understand the risks to their family, and they may actually understand the risks to their own children in the future, and may start considering genetic testing. At that age, they usually prefer talking to people their age, so they might not talk to you directly about their worries. So it might be helpful if they have a very close friend they can talk to, or maybe a cousin in the family who is in the same position, who they may share their feelings with. So, the top tips are to remember that your coping mechanism will influence how your children and relatives will deal with it. And I'm probably certain that most of you had some experience with toddlers. So if a toddler falls down and has a minor accident, I guess parents try to be as calm as they can, because if they get very anxious and get very worried, then the child will get very scared and cry, and will repeat that every time they fall down. So if you are not anxious in the same way as toddlers, and portray that it's something that we are fine with, it's not obviously the best diagnosis in the world, but it's not the worst, and that we can do things about it to help ourselves and the family, they may feel more empowered, and their coping strategies will be strengthened as well. Also, it's good to know that knowledge can actually increase anxiety. Understandably, many people may feel that there's a risk ahead, and they may feel in a way helpless, but knowing what your options are, being able to ask your GP, your genetic counsellor, anyone that knows the facts about the condition is very helpful. And please feel comfortable to contact your genetic service if you are not certain about what's happening and what your plan is. Right, so this is a bad boy. Even though we think that communication is helpful, sometimes the elephant in the room is just what we need. And there's some exceptions in family communications where it may be best if we postpone talking to our relative. For example, if you're concerned that your relative may not be well, or maybe they're suffering from mental illness, and this information would cause them more harm than good, then it may be a good idea to maybe wait or discuss the subject with someone who's a specialist to help you breach the subject if needed. If you feel the information is more likely to cause damage in the short term, for example, let's say your children are due to have their GCSE exams, or maybe a wedding is coming up, or they have a birthday, maybe it's best if you just postpone it for a while until that event has gone by. Then when you're not certain if information is relevant for your relative, so if you're not certain that ex-cousin needs to know, or there may be a risk, it's best not to tell them until you're sure and you confirm with your clinician that actually yes, it's coming from that side of the family and that's why they need to know. And also, as Atali said earlier, if, for example, your relative does not want to know, just like in the twin situation, if your twin does not want to know, or if your mum does not want to know, then obviously we should respect that. Yeah, I know it's very difficult because sometimes when people have surgery to reduce risk, or if they have colonoscopy appointments, it may be obvious to the relative that there's something going on, but I guess there might be some way to help reduce that chance of information being reached. So who needs to know? Usually, first-degree relatives who are blood related to individuals with Lynch syndrome are at risk. Sometimes it's difficult to ascertain whether it's coming from mum's side or dad's side if they have passed away, but your clinician, genetic counsellor or clinical geneticist can help you identify that. Who can help? A relative that you trust, or a friend, or a partner can help you communicate this information. Ourselves, so you can contact us if you have any worries or if you want to discuss your strategy. Your group can hopefully help each other. And there's actually some other resources on the internet, like the Macmillan Lynch Support Group and the Lynch Syndrome International. There's also some very useful articles on the web. For example, there's an article from Macmillan about communicating with children. And there's some books, one of which is the one that I've mentioned here, that explains how to communicate serious illness. Obviously, serious illness may not necessarily be Lynch syndrome, but the principles are quite similar. Thank you. Any questions? I'll probably pass to the next speaker. That would be great.
Thanks, Demetra. That was